The ballroom smelled of champagne and desperation, a combination I'd come to associate with events designed to make people like me feel small. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across marble floors, and the string quartet in the corner played something classical that I couldn't name. I stood near a column draped in white roses, their fragrance cloying and too sweet, making my stomach turn. My dress, a simple navy gown I'd borrowed from my roommate, felt suddenly inadequate among the sea of designer silks and glittering jewelry that adorned every other woman in the room. This was the annual Convergence Gala, where supernatural communities gathered under the pretense of unity. In reality, it was a showcase of power. The vampires glided through the crowd with their unnatural grace. The witches whispered in clusters with knowing eyes. And the Lycans. The Lycans dominated every space they occupied, their presence filling rooms like a physical force. I shouldn't have come. My fingers found the hem of my clutch, squeezing the fabric until my knuckles went white. I'd promised my friend Sarah I would attend, that I would put myself out there and stop hiding from the world that had chewed me up and spit me out 6 months ago. But Sarah didn't understand what it felt like to be utterly ordinary in a world that worshipped power. She was a witch with genuine talent, her magic crackling at her fingertips whenever she wanted. I was just human, breakable, forgettable. The music swelled, and I watched couples move onto the dance floor. A vampire lord swept a fey woman into his arms. A witch laughed as her werewolf partner spun her, and there, cutting through the crowd with the confidence of someone who owned the very air he breathed, was the reason I'd almost stayed home. Damien. My ex-boyfriend moved like liquid shadow, his dark hair perfectly styled, his tailored suit emphasizing the lean, predatory build that came with being a high-ranking wolf. He had his hand on the lower back of a stunning redhead, a beta from the Silvercrest pack, if the rumors were true. She wore emeralds that matched her eyes, and when she tilted her head back to laugh at something he said, the sound carried across the room like bells. I turned away, heat flooding my cheeks. 6 months since he'd ended things, citing my fundamental unsuitability for his world. 6 months since he'd made it clear that a human girlfriend was a charming novelty, but never a serious prospect. The memory still stung like a fresh wound. The way he'd looked at me with something close to pity when he'd said, "You don't belong here, and you never will." Champagne? A server appeared at my elbow, and I took a glass just to have something to do with my hands. I shouldn't have looked back. I should have kept my eyes on the floor, on the roses, on anything else. But some masochistic part of me needed to see him again, needed to prove to myself that I was over it, that I'd moved on. Our eyes met across the ballroom. Damien's expression shifted, surprise, then something that looked almost like annoyance. He said something to the redhead, who glanced my way with barely concealed disdain, and then he was moving, toward me. Panic seized my chest. I couldn't do this. Couldn't stand here and make small talk while he paraded his new girlfriend. Couldn't pretend that seeing him didn't still hurt like breathing broken glass. I turned, searching for an exit, any exit. But the crowd had thickened, bodies pressed in from all sides. Lycans twice my size, vampires who looked at me like I was prey, witches whose power made the air shimmer. "Excuse me," I murmured, trying to push through, but no one moved. No one even looked at me. I was invisible again, the story of my life. Damien's voice cut through the noise. Wait, I didn't wait. I pushed harder, my heart hammering against my ribs, and suddenly I stumbled, my heel catching on something, my balance deserting me. I fell forward, champagne glass flying from my hand, and crashed directly into someone solid, not just someone. I knew it the instant my hands pressed against his chest, the heat radiating through expensive fabric, the absolute stillness of a predator who didn't startle, the scent of pine and winter air that seemed to cut through everything else in the room. "I'm so sorry," I gasped, trying to pull back. But strong hands caught my waist, steadying me. "Careful." The voice was low, edged with something that made every hair on my body stand at attention. I looked up and up, into the face of someone I'd only ever seen from a distance, King Ronan of the Northern Territories. He was larger than life in the most literal sense, towering over me even though I was wearing heels. His features were sharp and severe, carved from stone by someone who believed beauty should be dangerous. Dark hair fell just past his collar, and his eyes, pale gray, like winter storms, fixed on me with an intensity that made my breath catch. He sat in a chair that was practically a throne, positioned at the edge of the ballroom where he could observe everything. I'd literally fallen into his lap. "I'm so sorry," I repeated, mortification flooding through me. "I tripped. I didn't mean to." "Stay." The command was soft but absolute. I froze, my hands still pressed against his chest, acutely aware that every eye in the vicinity had turned toward us. The king didn't entertain guests. He didn't dance, didn't mingle, didn't engage. He attended these events as a political necessity and spent them watching from the shadows like a wolf studying prey. "I should go," I whispered, trying again to pull away. His hands tightened fractionally on my waist, not painfully, but firm enough to keep me exactly where I was. I said, "Stay. Your Majesty, what's your name?" The question caught me off guard. "Elena." "Elena." He said it like he was testing the weight of it. "You're frightened." It wasn't a question. Heat crept up my neck. "I'm fine." "You're running from someone." Those pale eyes flickered past me, scanning the crowd, and I knew the exact moment they landed on Damien. Something shifted in his expression, something cold and dangerous. The wolf who's staring at us like I've stolen his favorite toy. We're not. I stumbled over the words. He's just someone I used to know, and now he's walking this way. I tensed, resisting the urge to look over my shoulder. "Please, I don't want to cause a scene." "Then don't move." Before I could process what he meant, King Ronan shifted, one hand sliding from my waist to the small of my back, guiding me to sit fully across his lap. The position was intimate, possessive, and completely shocking. I could feel the hard muscle of his thighs beneath me, the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the warmth of his body seeping into mine. "What are you doing?" I hissed. "Helping you avoid your ex." His voice carried a hint of dark amusement. "Unless you'd prefer to face him alone." I opened my mouth to respond, but then Damien's voice cut through the space between us. "Elena." Every muscle in my body went rigid. King Ronan's hand pressed gently against my back, a silent reminder to stay still, stay calm. "Damien." I forced myself to look at him. My ex-boyfriend stood 3 feet away, his expression a carefully controlled mask, but I could see the anger simmering beneath. The redhead hovered behind him, her eyes wide with shock. "I didn't expect to see you here," Damien said, his gaze flickering to King Ronan with barely concealed wariness. "You said you were done with these events." "I changed my mind." "I see." His jaw tightened. "And you've made interesting company." King Ronan spoke before I could respond, his voice carrying effortless authority. "Is there something you need?" It was a dismissal wrapped in politeness. Damien's eyes narrowed. "I was just saying hello to an old friend." "You've said hello." The king's tone didn't change, but something in it made the temperature drop. "Now you can say goodbye." For a long moment no one moved. The tension stretched taut as a wire, and I could feel the weight of dozens of stares pressing against us. Damien's hands clenched at his sides, his wolf rising close to the surface. I could see it in the way his eyes flashed, in the rigid set of his shoulders, but he couldn't challenge a king. Not here, not publicly. "Of course." Damien's smile was razor sharp. "Enjoy your evening, Elena." He turned and walked away, the redhead trailing after him, and I finally allowed myself to breathe. "Thank you," I whispered, starting to stand. "I should stay a moment longer." King Ronan's hand remained firm on my back. Everyone is still watching. He was right. I could feel the weight of curious eyes, hear the whispers starting to ripple through the crowd. The human girl sitting in the Lycan king's lap. It would be the talk of the gala within minutes. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I didn't mean to put you in an awkward position." "You think this is awkward for me?" There was amusement in his voice now, genuine rather than mocking. I've sat through 3-day peace negotiations with vampire lords who wanted to rip out my throat. A beautiful woman in my lap is hardly a hardship. Beautiful. The word sent unexpected heat through my chest. Still, I said, I should go before people get the wrong idea. What idea would that be? I met his eyes and found something unexpected there. Interest, curiosity, and beneath it all, a loneliness that mirrored my own, that I'm someone important, someone who matters. And you don't think you matter? The question was too perceptive, cutting too close to wounds I kept hidden. I'm just human. Just human, he repeated slowly, and his hand moved from my back to catch my chin, tilting my face up to meet his gaze fully. The touch was gentle, but undeniable. The woman who walked into a room full of predators alone, who faced her ex-boyfriend with her head high, despite the fear in her eyes. Who apologized for falling when anyone else would have blamed me for being in the way. His thumb brushed across my jaw, and I shivered. Tell me again how you don't matter. I couldn't speak. Couldn't think past the feeling of his skin against mine, the intensity in those storm-gray eyes, the way his words seemed to wrap around something broken inside me and hold it together. I won't let him hurt you, King Ronan said softly, and I believed him. The days following the gala blurred together in a haze of disbelief and anxiety. I'd expected the attention to fade, for the gossip to move on to the next scandal. But instead, it intensified. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from people I barely knew, asking about the king, about what happened, about whether the rumors were true. What rumors? I'd wanted to ask, but I was afraid of the answer. Sarah cornered me in our apartment 3 days later, her dark eyes bright with curiosity and concern. You need to tell me everything, and I mean everything. And I was curled on the couch, laptop balanced on my knees, pretending to work on a freelance editing project that was already 2 days overdue. There's nothing to tell. Nothing? She perched on the arm of the couch, her energy crackling around her like static electricity, a sure sign she was agitated. Elena, you sat in King Ronan's lap for 20 minutes. People are saying he dismissed 3 separate alphas who tried to approach him because he was too focused on you. There's a photo circulating of him looking at you like you're the only person in the room. My stomach twisted. There's a photo? Several. She pulled out her phone, swiping through images that made my face burn. In each one, King Ronan's attention was fixed entirely on me, his hand on my back, his head tilted close to mine, his expression somewhere between protective and possessive. And me, looking small and uncertain, but somehow held, safe. It was just one night, I said weakly. He was being kind. Sarah's laugh was sharp. Honey, the Lycan king doesn't do kind. He does strategic, powerful, terrifying, not kind. But he had been kind. Beneath the danger and the authority, there had been something almost gentle in the way he'd spoken to me, in the way his thumb had brushed my jaw like I was something precious rather than something fragile. I shook my head, closing my laptop. It doesn't matter. I'll probably never see him again. The knock on the door came exactly 3 seconds later. Sarah and I froze, staring at each other. Are you expecting someone? She whispered. No. Another knock, firmer this time. Sarah moved to the door, peering through the peephole, and the color drained from her face. Oh my God. What? It's him. Well, not him exactly, but she yanked open the door before I could stop her. A man stood in the hallway, tall and broad-shouldered, with the unmistakable bearing of a Lycan warrior. His dark suit was impeccable, his expression professionally neutral. Miss Elena Hartley? My mouth went dry. Yes? I'm Captain Drake, head of King Ronan's personal guard. He inclined his head slightly. His Majesty requests your presence at the Northern Estate this evening for dinner. A car will arrive at 7 o'clock. The world tilted. I'm sorry. What? Dinner. Captain Drake repeated patiently. The king wishes to speak with you. Why? Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. That would be between you and his Majesty. Will you accept the invitation? I looked at Sarah, who was staring at me with her mouth hanging open, then back at Captain Drake. This was insane. Kings didn't invite random human women to dinner. They especially didn't send their personal guards to deliver invitations to tiny apartments in the human quarter of the city. Can I ask what happens if I say no? You can say no. Captain Drake's tone suggested that no one ever did. Though His Majesty was quite clear that he hoped you would accept, there was something in the phrasing, hoped, not expected, that made the decision easier. Okay, yes, I'll be ready at 7. Captain Drake nodded, handed me a cream-colored card with elegant script detailing the dress code and address, and left without another word. The moment the door closed, Sarah grabbed my shoulders. You're having dinner with the king, the actual king. Do you understand what this means? That I need to find something to wear? I stared at the card, my hands shaking slightly. It means he's interested in you. Sarah's grip tightened. Elena, this could change everything. Or it could be nothing. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. You didn't send your personal guard to invite someone to dinner if it was nothing. The northern estate sat on the edge of the city, where urban sprawl gave way to dense forest. As the sleek black car wound up the private road, I pressed my face to the window, watching ancient trees slide past in the growing darkness. The estate itself was more fortress than home, all stone and dark wood, with towers that reached toward the sky like claws. The driver, silent throughout the journey, opened my door and gestured toward the entrance. I stepped out, smoothing down the simple black dress I'd chosen. The nicest thing I owned, though still woefully inadequate compared to the grandeur surrounding me. Captain Drake appeared at the top of the steps. Miss Hartley, welcome. His Majesty is waiting in the library. He led me through halls that smelled of wood smoke and old leather, past tapestries depicting battles I didn't recognize, and portraits of stern-faced Lycans who seemed to judge me with their painted eyes. My heels clicked too loudly on the stone floors, announcing my presence, my otherness, my complete lack of belonging. The library doors were already open. King Ronan stood by the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel, staring into flames that cast shadows across his features. He'd shed the formal attire from the gala for dark slacks and a white shirt, with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with scars. He looked more dangerous like this, less civilized, more wolf. He turned as I entered, and the intensity of his gaze made my breath catch just like it had at the gala. Elena. My name and his voice still felt like something significant. Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me. I clasped my hands in front of me to keep them from shaking, though I'll admit I'm not sure why you did. A slight smile touched his mouth. Direct. I appreciate that. He gestured to a chair near the fire. Sit, please. I perched on the edge of the leather armchair, acutely aware of how out of place I looked in this room full of priceless books and antique furniture. King Ronan settled into the chair opposite mine, close enough that I could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes. I wanted to apologize, he said. Whatever I'd expected, it wasn't that. For what? For putting you in an uncomfortable position at the gala. I could see you were trying to avoid attention, and I made you the center of it. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. That wasn't my intention. You were helping me, I said quietly. You didn't have to, but you did. I'm grateful. Your ex-boyfriend. His expression darkened slightly. Damien Cross, beta of the Eastridge Pack. You looked him up. I make it a point to know about anyone who causes distress to people under my protection. I'm not under your protection. Aren't you? The question hung between us, weighted with meaning I wasn't sure I understood. I shifted in my seat, fingers curling into the armrest. Why am I really here? King Ronan was quiet for a long moment, and I watched the firelight play across his features, softening the hard edges without making him any less dangerous. Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you, he said finally. About the way you apologized for falling when it wasn't your fault. About the fear in your eyes that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with feeling invisible. About the fact that you walked into that ballroom alone, knowing you didn't belong, and stayed anyway. My heart was doing something complicated in my chest. If you say just human again, I'm going to have Captain Drake remove every mirror in this estate so you can stop seeing yourself through others' eyes. There was no heat in his voice, only a strange kind of frustration. Do you know what I see when I look at you? I shook my head, not trusting my voice. Someone brave enough to exist in a world that constantly tells her she's not enough. Someone who walked away from a man who tried to diminish her rather than fighting to keep something that would only hurt her. Someone who apologized to a king because kindness matters more to her than status. He paused. Someone worth knowing. Tears pricked at my eyes, sudden and unwelcome. I blinked them back. You don't know me. Then let me. He stood, moving to a sidebar where crystal decanters caught the firelight. Dinner won't be ready for another hour. Talk to me, Elena. Tell me something real. I watched him pour amber liquid into 2 glasses, his movements precise and controlled. Everything about him was controlled, I realized. A constant restraint that came from being too powerful, too dangerous, too other for casual interaction. What do you want to know? I asked. Whatever you want to tell me. He handed me a glass, his fingers brushing mine briefly, a shock of warmth that traveled up my arm. Start anywhere. So I did. I told him about growing up in a small town where nothing supernatural existed, about the shock of discovering an entire hidden world when I moved to the city for college, about meeting Damien at a coffee shop where I worked, about how exciting it had felt to be chosen by someone so powerful, so magnetic, about the slow realization that I was an accessory to him, a novelty, never a partner. King Ronan listened without interrupting, his attention absolute. No one had ever listened to me like that. Like every word mattered. Like my story was worth the time it took to tell it. He made you feel small, he said when I finished. He made me feel realistic. I took a sip of the whiskey, letting it burn down my throat. I am small in this world. Fragile. Temporary. Those are just facts. Facts. King Ronan set his glass down with a soft click. Here's a fact for you. I've ruled the northern territories for 15 years. I've fought wars, negotiated treaties, held together a kingdom that constantly threatens to tear itself apart. I've done things that would horrify you, made decisions that cost lives, carried burdens that would break most people. He leaned forward, and the intensity in his eyes pinned me in place. And in all that time, I have never met anyone who looked at me the way you did at that gala. How did I look at you? Like I was just a man. The words settled between us, heavy with loneliness. You are just a man, I said softly. A powerful one, a dangerous one, but still just a man. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe, or recognition. Everyone sees the crown, the power, the monster capable of terrible things. They forget there's someone underneath. I haven't forgotten. The admission felt too intimate, too revealing, but I couldn't take it back, didn't want to. King Ronan stood, and I thought he might move away, but instead he crossed to my chair and extended his hand. Walk with me. I placed my hand in his, letting him pull me to my feet. His palm was warm and rough with calluses, his grip firm but careful. He led me through a set of doors I hadn't noticed, onto a terrace that overlooked the forest. The night air was cool and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and earth. This is my favorite place, he said, his voice quieter now. When everything becomes too much, I come here. We stood at the railing, hands still joined, and I could feel the steady thrum of his pulse against my palm, or maybe it was mine. It was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. I won't let him hurt you, King Ronan said again, echoing his words from the gala. Not Damien, not anyone. Do you believe me? I turned to look at him, at this man who ruled kingdoms and commanded armies, who could have anyone and had chosen to invite me here, to listen to my story, to hold my hand like it mattered. Yes, I whispered. I believe you. 3 weeks passed in a strange, suspended reality that felt nothing like my ordinary life. King Ronan, as he'd insisted I call him when we were alone, didn't court me the way Damien had. There were no grand public gestures, no expensive gifts meant to impress. Instead, he did something far more dangerous. He made himself available. Dinners at the estate became a regular occurrence, sometimes formal affairs with his advisors present, sometimes just the two of us in that library by the fire. He asked questions that no one else had ever thought to ask, what I wanted from life, what frightened me, what made me laugh. And he listened to the answers like they mattered, like I was solving puzzles he'd spent years trying to figure out. I learned things about him too, that he'd become king at 19, when his father died in a territorial dispute, that he had a sister, Celeste, who lived in the Western Territories and called him weekly to make sure he was eating properly. That he played piano, but only when he thought no one could hear. That beneath the crown and the careful control, he was desperately, achingly, lonely. "You carry the weight of an entire kingdom," I'd said one night, watching him stare into his whiskey glass like it held answers. "Who carries your weight?" He'd looked at me then with such raw vulnerability that I'd almost reached for him. "No one." Until recently. The words had settled in my chest and refused to leave, but the outside world was less kind about our developing connection. The whispers at the gala had evolved into outright speculation. I'd been photographed leaving the northern estate twice, and both times the comments online had been vicious: gold digger, social climber, delusional human who thinks she can hold a king's interest, and worse, she won't last. He'll get bored and throw her away just like the last one did. Sarah tried to shield me from it, but the poison seeped through anyway. I started second-guessing everything. The way I dressed, the things I said, whether I was reading too much into Ronan's attention. Maybe this was just entertainment for him. Maybe I was making the same mistake twice, just with higher stakes. I was spiraling through these thoughts on a Thursday afternoon, sitting in a coffee shop and pretending to work on edits when my phone buzzed. "Captain Drake. His Majesty requests your presence at the estate tonight. There's been an incident." My blood went cold. "Is he all right?" "He's unharmed, but he's asking for you specifically." I was out the door before I'd fully processed the decision. The estate felt different when I arrived. Tense. Guards stood at attention along the walls, their expressions grim, and I could feel the weight of something dangerous in the air. A charge like lightning before a storm. Captain Drake met me at the entrance, his usual professional mask cracked slightly. "Miss Hartley, thank you for coming so quickly." "What happened?" "There was an attack during the King's visit to the Eastridge Pact territory this afternoon. 3 rogues attempted an ambush." He guided me through the halls faster than usual. His Majesty dealt with the threat, but several pack members were injured in the process. He's been difficult since returning. Difficult. I knew what that meant. The wolf rising too close to the surface, the control slipping, the dangerous edge that came with being what he was. "Why does he want to see me?" Captain Drake glanced at me, and something like sympathy crossed his features. "You calm him. I don't pretend to understand it, but you do." We reached a set of doors I'd never seen before. Heavy oak reinforced with iron. Drake knocked once, then opened them without waiting for a response. The room beyond was clearly Ronan's private study, darker than the library, more personal, with maps spread across a massive desk and weapons mounted on the walls. And there, standing by the window with his back to us, shoulders rigid with tension, was the king himself. "Leave us," Ronan said without turning. Drake hesitated. "Your Majesty, now." The command cracked through the air like a whip. Drake retreated immediately, closing the doors behind him, and suddenly I was alone with something that felt more wolf than man. "Ronan?" I kept my voice soft, non-threatening. He turned and my breath caught. His shirt was torn, blood-stained, though I could see no injuries beneath. His eyes had that feral gleam I'd only glimpsed before, and his hands were clenched so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I'm not safe right now. Drake said you asked for me. I did. I shouldn't have." He turned back to the window, his entire body vibrating with barely controlled energy. The rogues targeted the pack gathering. Children were present. If we'd been even a minute slower, but you weren't. I moved closer carefully, watching for any sign I should stop. "Everyone's safe because of you. You don't understand." His laugh was harsh, bitter. "I had to. There was so much." He broke off, running a hand through his hair with enough force to hurt. "This is what I am, Elena. This is the monster everyone sees." "I don't see a monster." "Then you're not looking hard enough." He spun to face me, and the rawness in his expression made my heart ache. "I killed them. All 3. Tore them apart with my bare hands because they dared threaten what was mine, and the worst part? I didn't hesitate. Didn't feel remorse. Just satisfaction. The confession hung between us, heavy and sharp. I could see him waiting for my reaction. For the fear, the disgust, the inevitable retreat that would prove he was right to keep everyone at a distance. But I'd spent 6 months being made to feel like my gentleness was weakness. My humanity was inadequacy. I was done apologizing for being what I was. And I was done letting others apologize for being what they were. You protected people, I said firmly. Children. That's not monstrous. That's what a king does. You don't know what you're saying. Don't I? I closed the remaining distance between us, tilting my head back to meet his eyes. You think I haven't seen violence? Haven't understood what this world requires? I know what you are, Ronan. I've always known. And I'm still here. Something in him cracked. I could see it in the way his shoulders dropped, in the breath that shuddered out of him like a release. Why? Because when you look at me, I don't feel small. The words came out before I could stop them. Raw and honest. Because you listen when I talk. Because you make me feel like I matter. Like I'm worth something beyond being human or fragile or temporary. I reached up, placing my palm against his chest, feeling the wild thunder of his heartbeat. Because beneath the crown and the power and yes, the violence, you're just someone who's tired of being alone. His hand covered mine, pressing it harder against his heart. Elena, let me help. I didn't know exactly what I was offering, but it felt important, essential. However you need. Let me help carry the weight. For a long moment he just stared at me, and I could see the war playing out behind his eyes. The need to accept versus the instinct to protect, to push away, to keep himself isolated and safe from the vulnerability of connection. Then he pulled me against him. The embrace was crushing, desperate. His arms wrapping around me like I was the only solid thing in a tilting world. I could feel the tremor running through his frame, the way he buried his face in my hair and just breathed, like my presence alone was enough to anchor him. I thought I'd lost the ability to care about anything beyond duty. He said into my hair, his voice barely above a whisper. And then you fell into my lap and looked at me like I was worth knowing. I wrapped my arms around his waist, holding him as tightly as he held me. You are worth knowing. We stood like that for a long time, locked together in the fading light, and I felt something fundamental shift between us. This wasn't the slow burn of attraction anymore. This was recognition. Two lonely people finding something in each other that they'd stopped believing existed. When Ronan finally pulled back, his eyes had cleared, the wolf receding beneath the man. He cupped my face in his hands, thumbs brushing along my cheekbones with devastating gentleness. I need to tell you something, he said. The attack today, it wasn't random. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? The rogues were hired. We found evidence linking them to someone within the Eastridge pack. His jaw tightened. Someone who's been spreading rumors about you, about us, trying to discredit our connection. Damien. I didn't need to ask. We don't have proof yet, but yes, I believe so. His hands tightened slightly on my face. He approached me yesterday, asked me to end things with you, said you were using me for status and protection, that I was making a fool of myself with a human who couldn't possibly understand our world. Hurt lanced through me, sharp and familiar. What did you say? I told him that if he spoke about you again, I would personally ensure he spent the rest of his days as a rogue without pack or territory. Ronan's expression was fierce, protective. But Elena, you need to understand. This isn't going to stop. Dating me, being with me, it puts a target on your back. There will always be people who think you're not good enough, who want to drive us apart, who see you as a weakness they can exploit. I know. And you're still here. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I'm still here. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against mine, and I could feel the tension draining out of him, replaced by something softer. You're braver than you think, or more stubborn. His laugh was quiet, genuine. Both. Definitely both. He pulled back just enough to look at me properly. Stay tonight. I'm not asking for... He fumbled over the words in a way that was endearing on someone usually so controlled. Just stay. Have dinner with me. Let me know you're safe. Okay, I said simply. Relief flooded his expression. He took my hand, threading our fingers together, and led me from the study. As we walked through the halls, I noticed guards straightening at our approach, their expressions shifting from tense to calm as they saw their king had settled. Captain Drake met us outside the dining room, his relief visible. "Your Majesty, Miss Hartley, dinner is ready." "Thank you, Drake." Ronan's voice had returned to its usual command, though his hand remained firm around mine. "And Drake?" "Increase security around Miss Hartley's apartment. Discreet, but thorough. Already done, sir." I looked between them. "You don't need to." "Yes," Ronan said firmly. "I do." He turned to face me fully. "I meant what I said at the gala. I won't let him hurt you. I won't let anyone hurt you. And if that means guards and security and using every resource I have to keep you safe, then that's what I'll do." There was no arguing with that tone, that expression, and truthfully, I didn't want to argue. The idea of being protected, of being important enough to protect, still felt foreign, but increasingly necessary. "Thank you," I said quietly. We ate dinner in the smaller dining room, just the two of us, and talked about everything except attacks and threats and exes who couldn't let go. Ronan told me about Celeste's latest disaster with a visiting dignitary. I told him about Sarah's attempts to set me up with her witch friends before I'd met him. We laughed and argued playfully about books, and existed in a bubble of normalcy that felt precious, precisely because it was so rare. Later, when Captain Drake drove me home, I found a note tucked into my jacket pocket. Ronan's handwriting, bold and sure. "You carry my weight better than I ever carried it alone. Thank you for staying. R." I pressed the note to my chest and smiled all the way home. The attack changed everything. Within 48 hours, Ronan's investigation confirmed what we'd both suspected. Damien had orchestrated the ambush. Not directly, he was too smart for that. But through intermediaries and carefully hidden payments. The rogues had been hired to create chaos, to make Ronan look weak, to prove that his distraction with a human was compromising his ability to lead. It had backfired spectacularly. The evidence was presented to the Council of Alphas on a gray Monday morning, and by noon, Damien Cross had been stripped of his beta position and exiled from the Eastridge Pack. His family's standing was destroyed, his future in shambles, and the redhead girlfriend had vanished within hours of the announcement. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. "You're too kind-hearted for your own good," Sarah said, watching me stare at my phone where messages of support and gossip competed for my attention. "He tried to have the king killed. He deserves worse than exile." "I know." I set the phone down, unable to shake the weight in my chest. I just keep thinking about how twisted someone has to be to go that far. How much he must have hated seeing me happy. "That's not your burden to carry, isn't it?" I looked at her, feeling older than my 26 years. If I hadn't gone to that gala, if I hadn't sat in Ronan's lap, if I'd just stayed invisible like I always did, then you'd still be miserable, Damien would still be a terrible person, and the king would still be lonely. Sarah crossed her arms, her witch's intuition making her eyes sharp. "You didn't cause this, Elena. You just revealed what was already there." She was right. I knew she was right, but knowing didn't make the guilt easier to bear. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Ronan. "Can you come to the estate? There's someone I'd like you to meet." I arrived an hour later to find the estate buzzing with unusual energy. Additional guards patrolled the grounds, and through the windows I could see people moving through the halls, Lycans in formal attire, their postures radiating importance. Captain Drake met me with an expression that was almost apologetic. "Miss Hartley, I should warn you, the king's sister arrived unexpectedly this morning." My stomach flipped. "Celeste?" "She heard about the attack and came immediately." Drake led me through the familiar halls toward the library. "She's protective." That felt like an understatement I'd regret not taking more seriously. The library doors were open, and I could hear voices before I entered. Ronan's deep rumble and a woman's lighter tone, musical but edged with steel. Absolutely insane, Ronan. A coordinated attack on Packlands? This is exactly what I warned you about when you took the crown. You can't trust. The woman cut off as I appeared in the doorway. She was beautiful in a way that made my borrowed dress feel like a costume. Tall and lean, with dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and the same storm-gray eyes as her brother, she wore tailored pants and a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly rent. And she looked at me with the sharp assessment of someone used to evaluating threats. "Celeste?" Ronan said, standing from his chair. "This is Elena." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Celeste's gaze traveled over me slowly, taking in every detail, and I fought the urge to fidget under the scrutiny. "So you're the human everyone's talking about." Her voice was pleasant, but there was an edge beneath it, the one who has my brother so distracted he nearly got himself killed. "Celeste," Ronan's voice held a warning. "What?" "I'm just stating facts." She moved closer, and I could feel the power radiating from her. Not as overwhelming as Ronan's, but substantial enough to make my skin prickle. "Tell me, Elena, what exactly are your intentions with my brother?" I swallowed hard, forcing myself to hold her gaze. "I care about him. Care about him." She laughed, but it wasn't kind. "How sweet. And when this caring becomes inconvenient, when the reality of what he is, what this life demands, becomes too much for your fragile human sensibilities, what then?" "That's enough." Ronan was beside me in an instant, his hand finding mine. "You don't get to interrogate her like she's a suspect. Someone needs to." Celeste's expression hardened. "You're the king, Ronan. Every decision you make affects thousands of lives. And this decision, getting involved with a human who painted a target on your back, it's reckless." "I painted the target on my own back," I said quietly, finding my voice, "by existing, by being visible. That's not something I can apologize for anymore." Celeste's eyes narrowed. "You think you understand our world because you dated one wolf and caught the attention of another? You have no idea what you've walked into." "You're right." The admission seemed to surprise her. "I don't fully understand. I probably never will. But I understand that your brother spends every day carrying a weight that would crush most people. I understand that he's brilliant and kind and desperately lonely despite being surrounded by people who claim to serve him. And I understand that he deserves someone who sees him, not just the crown. And you think that someone is you? I think that's for him to decide." I squeezed Ronan's hand. "Not me. Not you. Him." Silence stretched between us, taut and charged. I could feel Ronan's thumb brushing across my knuckles in a gesture of support, of pride, and I drew strength from it. Finally, Celeste's expression shifted. Not quite approval, but something close to respect. "You have more spine than I expected." "She has more spine than most," Ronan said, "which is why I asked her here. Celeste, I wanted you to meet Elena because she's important to me. More important than I think either of us fully realized until recently." He turned to look at me, and the intensity in his gaze made my breath catch. "And I wanted Elena to meet you because family matters. Your opinion matters. But ultimately, this is my choice." "Your choice that affects the entire kingdom," Celeste pointed out. "Yes, and I'm making it anyway." The declaration hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. I felt simultaneously terrified and exhilarated, understanding that this was Ronan publicly committing to whatever this was between us, in front of his sister, in front of the court, that I could hear murmuring in the halls beyond. Celeste studied us both for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine. But if this goes sideways, I'm saying I told you so." Duly noted. Ronan's relief was palpable. "And you?" Celeste turned to me, her expression softening fractionally. "If you hurt him, I'll make the rogues look like amateurs." Despite everything, I smiled. Fair enough. The rest of the afternoon passed in a whirlwind of introductions. Celeste had brought several members of the Western Council with her, and they all wanted to meet the human who'd apparently captured their king's attention. I shook hands with alphas whose names I immediately forgot, made polite conversation with advisors who clearly thought I was a passing phase, and tried not to feel completely overwhelmed by the weight of expectation pressing down on me. Through it all, Ronan stayed close, Not hovering, but present, a steady anchor in choppy waters. I watched him navigate the political currents with practiced ease, deflecting intrusive questions and steering conversations away from topics that made me uncomfortable, and I realized how carefully he'd been shielding me from this world until now. It's a lot, isn't it? Celeste appeared at my elbow during a brief lull, handing me a glass of wine. The politics. It's intense, I admitted. It never stops. She took a sip of her own wine, watching Ronan across the room as he spoke with an elderly alpha. Being connected to him means being connected to all of this, the intrigue, the danger, the constant scrutiny. Are you sure you're ready for that? I followed her gaze, watching the way Ronan's shoulders carried tension even as he smiled at something the alpha said, the way his eyes flickered to me periodically, like he needed to confirm I was still there. No, I said honestly. I'm not sure at all, but I think being sure is overrated. Celeste laughed, a real laugh this time, surprised and genuine. You know what? Maybe you'll survive this after all. The guest didn't leave until well past midnight. By the time the estate finally quieted, I was exhausted, my face aching from forced smiles and my head spinning with names and titles I'd never remember. Ronan found me on the terrace where he'd first held my hand, staring out at the forest beyond. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. I'm sorry, he said, coming to stand beside me. That was supposed to be just Celeste. I didn't know she'd bring half the Western Council with her. It's okay. I leaned against the railing, letting the cool air clear my head. They needed to see me, to evaluate whether I'm a threat or an asset. And what's the verdict? Jury's still out, I think. I glanced at him. Your sister threatened to kill me if I hurt you. She threatened to kill me if I hurt you. So I'd say we're even. He moved closer, and I could feel the heat of him despite the night air. What she said earlier, about this affecting the kingdom, she's not wrong. My chest tightened. I know. If we continue this, if we make it official, there will be challenges. Other packs who think a human queen is an insult. Traditionalists who believe you weaken me. People who will test you, push you, try to drive you away to prove their point. He turned to face me fully. I can protect you from many things, but I can't protect you from the weight of this crown. That's something we'd have to carry together. Queen. The word made my head spin. Ronan. I'm not proposing, he said quickly, though his slight smile suggested he'd noticed my panic. Not yet, anyway, but I need you to understand what I'm asking for. I need you to know what you'd be choosing. I looked at him, really looked at him. At the king who'd sat alone at galas because connection felt too dangerous. At the man who'd listened to my story like it mattered. Who'd held me when I was scared. Who'd protected me without making me feel weak. At the person who saw past my humanity to something worth fighting for. What are you asking for? I said softly. Everything. His hand came up to cup my face. The gesture now familiar and precious. I'm asking you to stand beside me. To face the challenges and the scrutiny and the endless politics. To let me build a life with you despite every reason why it should be impossible. His thumb brushed across my cheekbone. I'm asking you to choose this. Choose me. Choose us. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. This was terrifying. Impossible. Everything I'd never thought to want because wanting it felt like setting myself up for heartbreak. But it was also real. The most real thing I'd felt since walking into that gala and falling into his lap. I choose you, I whispered. The words had barely left my mouth before he kissed me. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was claiming and desperate and full of weeks of restraint finally breaking. His hands threaded into my hair, tilting my head back, and I gripped his shirt like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. He tasted like whiskey in winter. And when he pulled me flush against him, I could feel the wild thunder of his heartbeat matching my own. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against mine. I choose you too, he said roughly. In case that wasn't clear, I laughed, breathless and dizzy and happier than I had any right to be. It was pretty clear. We stood there wrapped together under the stars, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt chosen, important. Enough. The announcement came 3 weeks later, during the annual council summit where representatives from all territories gathered to discuss policy and settle disputes. Ronan had warned me it would be public, that there was no quiet way to introduce a human into the royal circle, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of standing before 200 Lycans and declaring my place at the king's side. I wore a gown that Celeste had insisted on, deep emerald silk that made my pale hair look almost luminous, and tried not to shake as Ronan introduced me to the assembled court. I present Elena Hartley. His voice carried through the massive hall, commanding absolute attention, who has agreed to stand as my partner and, when the time is right, as Queen of the Northern Territories. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, the applause began. Not universal. I could see the disapproving faces, the whispered conversations, the alphas who refused to clap. But enough to matter. Enough to make this real. Captain Drake had warned me about what would come next. The formal presentations, the oaths of loyalty I'd have to witness, the political maneuvering as various factions tried to curry favor or express their disapproval. What he hadn't warned me about was how exhausting it would be to smile through it all, to accept congratulations from people who clearly thought I was making a mistake, to pretend I didn't notice the sidelong glances and barely concealed skepticism. By the time we escaped to a private antechamber, my face ached, and my feet throbbed in the elegant heels. "You were perfect," Ronan said, pulling me into his arms the moment the door closed behind us. I was terrified. "You were perfectly terrified then." He kissed the top of my head, and I felt some of the tension drain from my shoulders. "Half the council is already placing bets on how long you'll last. Comforting, the other half is betting on you." His tone shifted to something warmer. "Celeste has apparently started a rather aggressive campaign in your favor. I think she actually likes you now." I pulled back to look at him. "Your sister still terrifies me. She terrifies everyone. It's her gift." Ronan cupped my face, his expression growing serious. "Elena, I need to tell you something. The council has demanded a trial period." My stomach sank. "What does that mean?" 6 months. You'll live here at the estate, learn our customs, train with our advisors. At the end of that time, the council will vote on whether to accept you as future queen." He paused. "If they reject you, I can override their decision, but it would cause significant political damage. They know that, which is why they're pushing for it. They want me to fail. Some do. But others genuinely want to see if you can handle this life." His thumbs brushed across my cheekbones. "I won't let them break you, but I also can't make this easier than it is. The choice is yours. We can end this now, before you give up your apartment and your independence, before you commit to something that might not work. Or we can fight for this, together." I thought about my tiny apartment with its leaking faucet and secondhand furniture, about my freelance work that barely paid the bills, about Sarah, who'd already promised to visit weekly and help me survive what she called wolf boot camp, about the life I'd been living, small and safe and utterly lonely. Then I thought about Ronan reading to me in the library while the fire crackled, about learning to navigate palace politics with Celeste's sharp guidance, about waking up beside someone who saw me as strong rather than fragile, about building something that mattered, even if it was terrifying. "I'm not going anywhere," I said firmly. Relief and love flooded his expression in equal measure. "Then let's show them what you're made of." The 6 months that followed were the hardest of my life. I woke at dawn for combat training with Captain Drake, who informed me that while I'd never be a warrior, I could at least learn not to be a liability. I spent afternoons with Celeste learning pack hierarchy, territorial law, and the intricate dance of supernatural politics. Evenings were devoted to formal dinners where I had to remember titles and territories while navigating conversations designed to trip me up. And through it all, there were the tests. Some were subtle, advisors who accidentally gave me incorrect information to see if I'd catch the mistake, servants who tried to treat me with disrespect to gauge my response, visiting dignitaries who made inappropriate comments to test my composure. Others were blatant. A group of traditionalist alphas publicly questioned my fitness during a council session, forcing me to defend my presence without Ronan's intervention. A rival pack's daughter challenged me to a traditional duel that I had to decline without losing face. Anonymous threats appeared in my quarters. though Drake's security always intercepted them before they could truly frighten me. I stumbled, made mistakes, lost my temper with an advisor who suggested I was playing queen rather than earning the title, cried in the shower after a particularly brutal session with Celeste that left me feeling utterly inadequate, but I also learned, grew. Found strength I didn't know I possessed. I discovered that my lack of supernatural power meant I could move through pack politics as a neutral party, mediating disputes that would have escalated with a more dominant presence. I learned that my empathy, the trait Damien had dismissed as weakness, allowed me to identify the real concerns beneath political posturing, making negotiations smoother. I proved that being human didn't mean being helpless. It just meant fighting differently, and Ronan was there through all of it. Not hovering or protecting me from the challenges, but supporting me when I needed it, celebrating my victories, holding me when I doubted myself. "They're starting to respect you," he told me one night, 4 months into the trial period. We were in his private quarters, our quarters now, and I was curled against his side, exhausted from a day of territorial negotiations. "Some of them," I corrected. "More than some. Drake told me the younger guards have started calling you the Steel Rose." His fingers traced lazy patterns on my shoulder. Beautiful, but surprisingly tough. I smiled despite my fatigue. "I like that better than the King's Human. You're so much more than that." He tilted my chin up to look at him. "You know that, right? Even if the council rejects you, even if this all falls apart, you're extraordinary, Elena. What you've accomplished these past months, the way you've adapted and fought and refused to break. I've never seen anything like it. I had good motivation." I reached up to touch his face, feeling the rough stubble along his jaw. "I love you." I'd said it before, whispered it in quiet moments, shown it in 1,000 small ways. But something about saying it now, after everything we'd survived, felt significant. "I love you too," he said quietly. "More than I thought I could love anything." "More than is probably wise for a king." "Then it's a good thing you're not just a king." I kissed him softly. "You're also just a man, remember?" His arms tightened around me. "How could I forget? You remind me every day." The final council vote took place on a cold February morning, exactly 6 months after the announcement. I stood before the assembled alphas and representatives, wearing the emerald gown again, because Celeste insisted it was lucky, and waited while they deliberated my fate. Ronan sat on his throne, looking every inch the king, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the armrests just a little too tightly. Celeste stood to his right, her expression carefully neutral, though she'd squeezed my hand before I'd taken my place in the center of the hall. The head of the council, an ancient alpha named Wilhelm, rose to deliver the verdict. "We have considered the evidence," he began, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "Miss Hartley's conduct during the trial period, her adaptation to our ways, her service to the Northern Territories." He paused, and my heart hammered against my ribs. "While there remain those who question the wisdom of a human queen, the majority of this council acknowledges that she has proven herself worthy of the position." Relief crashed through me so powerfully that my knees nearly buckled. "However," Wilhelm continued, and my brief joy froze, "we require one final demonstration. A public oath of loyalty and commitment, binding her to this territory and its people for the remainder of her life. Should she accept, the council will formally recognize her as queen designate." I looked at Ronan, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. This was the final test, the moment where I either committed completely or walked away. I turned back to Wilhelm, straightening my shoulders. "I accept." The oath ceremony was ancient and formal, involving words in a language I'd spent months learning and vows that bound me not just to Ronan, but to every pack, every territory, every Lycan under Northern rule. When I spoke the final line, "Until my last breath, I am yours," I felt something shift in the air, like the world itself was acknowledging the bond. Ronan descended from his throne and crossed to me, and the entire hall held its breath. "Elena Hartley," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I claim you as my queen, my partner, my equal in all things." He took my hands, and his voice softened to something meant only for me. My heart. Then he kissed me in front of 200 witnesses, and the hall erupted in applause. The celebration that followed lasted 3 days. Packs from across the territories came to pay their respects, and I received more gifts and well wishes than I knew what to do with. Sarah arrived on the second day, took one look at me in full queen regalia, and burst into tears of pride. Even some of the alphas who'd voted against me approached with grudging respect, acknowledging that I'd exceeded their expectations. But the moment that mattered most came on the 4th morning, when the estate had finally quieted, and Ronan and I stood on the terrace where he'd first asked me to choose him. "Do you regret it?" he asked, pulling me against his chest as we watched the sunrise paint the forest gold. "Giving up your old life?" I thought about the Elena who'd walked into that gala 6 months ago. Invisible, rejected, convinced she would never be enough. About the girl who'd apologized for existing in spaces that didn't want her. "No," I said honestly. That life was too small for who I was becoming. And now? Now I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I turned in his arms to face him, with you. Building something that matters, being seen. He kissed my forehead, my cheeks, my lips. "You were always worth seeing. The world was just too blind to notice." "Then it's a good thing you weren't." We stood there as the sun climbed higher. 2 people who'd found each other across impossible divides and chosen to build a bridge anyway. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would always be challenges, always be people who doubted, always be obstacles to overcome. But we'd face them together, and that was more than enough. Epilogue. 1 year later, I stood in the same ballroom where everything had begun, but this time I wasn't hiding by the pillars. I was at the center, wearing a crown that felt less foreign with each passing day, greeting guests at the annual Convergence Gala with Ronan at my side. Captain Drake approached with an ironic smile. "Your Majesty, there's someone requesting an audience." I followed his gaze and saw a familiar figure hovering near the entrance. Older, thinner, with the haunted look of someone who'd lost everything. Damien. My first instinct was to refuse, to turn away and pretend I hadn't seen him, but I'd learned something in the past year about power and compassion, about being strong enough to be kind. "Send him in," I said quietly. Ronan's hand found mine, squeezing gently. "Are you sure?" "Yes." Damien approached slowly, keeping his distance, his posture submissive in a way I'd never seen from him. "Your Majesty," he said, the title clearly difficult to speak. "Thank you for seeing me." "What do you want, Damien?" "To apologize." He met my eyes, and I saw genuine remorse there. "For everything. For making you feel small. For trying to destroy what you'd built. For being so consumed by jealousy that I nearly got people killed." He swallowed hard. "You deserved better than what I gave you, and you found it." I could have been cruel, could have reminded him of every hurt, every dismissal, every moment he'd made me doubt my worth. But that Elena was gone, replaced by someone who understood that holding on to anger only poisoned the person carrying it. "Thank you for the apology," I said simply. "I hope you find peace, Damien. I really do." He nodded, bowed to Ronan with the respect due a king, and left. "That was kind," Ronan murmured once we were alone again. "He was right about one thing," I said, leaning into Ronan's warmth. "I found better. I found everything." The music swelled, and Ronan pulled me onto the dance floor. And as we moved together beneath the same crystal chandeliers that had witnessed my transformation, I realized something fundamental. I'd walked into this ballroom a year ago thinking I didn't belong. Now I knew the truth. I'd always belonged. I'd just been waiting for someone to see it. And Ronan had seen it from the very first moment. We danced until the stars came out, the king and his queen, building a future that proved love could bridge any divide, if you were brave enough to fall.